Think we've given it a moment, so ready to get started. Thank you for saying hello in the chat. It's nice to see we've got kind of a range of different roles here, all generally within kind of science leadership within the science departments across the country, which is nice. So just to kind of do introductions, my name is Eva. I'm from the partnerships team at Art Curriculum Plus, formerly a science teacher, but now working across all our programs. And today our webinar is going to be hosted by my colleague Jess, who is our head of science at Art Curriculum Plus.
Thanks, Eva. Really pleased to see you all today, and thank you already for participating in the chat. That's lovely. I'm going to get started. So, as Eva has said, we are talking today about triple science, and we're really excited to share our approach with you. Let me just show you the agenda. By the end of the session today, you have a really clear idea of the decisions you'll need to make and the trade-offs that you might need to think about when you're planning your offer for triple science. I just wanted to flag that there's going to be loads of information in this session, and Eva will circulate the recording later on for you to look at in your own time with your teams. And I've also created a toolkit for you to take away and work with your teams on, and Eva will circulate that as well after this meeting. So the toolkit kind of has some timelines for you to think about. It has some rubrics that you can use to make some great decisions, and also some toolkits for you to manage this transition. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background of why we feel able to share our approach to this problem. Art schools are a multi-academy trust with schools across England. We serve a really diverse range of schools and communities. 90% of our schools are located in an area with above average deprivation. And as a result, 45% of our pupils are eligible for free school meals, double the national average. We feel like equity is really important as part of our mission. So we're thinking really deeply about how this change for triple science can be implemented within our schools to ensure their success. And as our mission is to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of their background, the subject knowledge and skills that will allow them to achieve, we're sharing these approaches together to support schools with this tricky transition. As you can see on our mission, it's not just our pupils that we want to support, it's all pupils. So you might be wondering about what is the difference between ARC and Art Curriculum Plus. So AC Plus is a non-profit spin-off from art schools. We produce curricula that are used by the art schools, but we also provide ourselves these subject excellence programs to schools across the country. So we have English Mastery Primary and English Maths Mastery Primary, and then we have 4 secondary programs as well: Maths, English, Geography, and of course Science. For science, we support over 100 schools across the country with our programs. So it has a really wide-ranging influence. And that's why we have to think about this problem so carefully, because it's not just the art schools that we're thinking about, it's all our schools. So I thought we'd start off with what we already know about the changes to triple science, and also a little bit about what we don't know or the assumptions we're going to make. So this is what the Curriculum Assessment Review, Becky Francis' review, said. I'm sure that many of you have read it, so I'm just highlighting a really pertinent section here, which says that there should be an entitlement for any student who wants to study triple science. Slightly different is what the Department for Education have said. They want to take on their recommendation, but they have phrased it as students who would benefit from studying triple science should have the opportunity to do so. What they haven't really made clear is what they mean when they say who will benefit, and we're hoping a little bit more information comes out about that soon. Throughout this presentation and when creating our plans at ARC, we've really had to make some educated guesses and assumptions about how these changes will happen. And so I'm just foregrounding those here because although we think this is the most likely option, things might change a little bit depending on what happens here. So we're assuming that double and triple will both be there. We know that triple is going to be there. They've made that clear, but they haven't actually said that double is going to remain as a route. We're assuming tiering will be retained. We're expecting that it'll be that mainstream schools are expected to give students the option to study triple science rather than it being a forced choice for some. We are assuming that double science will be a viable pathway to A-level science and beyond. We're assuming that triple science entitlement starts when the new curriculum is introduced, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And also that Key Stage 3 is rolled out year by year and not all at once. You'll see why that's important in a minute. I would like to add that very many in the sector were hoping that this dual route would be dropped because it just adds complication to an already complicated subject. We know that just having a single route was a really popular option amongst educators and the Learner Society. And at AC Plus, we were a bit disappointed that this wasn't the case. But we know it's not the case, that we know there's going to be a dual route. Well, we expect there's going to be a dual route. So we're actually now moving on to considering what we can do to make sure that this new landscape is better than what we've had previously. So just to give you a heads up on the timeline, so we were hoping it would be spring 2026, as in now, that we get the draft programs of study, but we now understand that's going to be in the summer. Next spring, we should get the final programs of study, with teaching starting the next September. In 2029, we're expecting the new GCSE specifications so that the students will do the exams the next summer. However, there is word on the street that perhaps we might be pushed back into another year. But for now, we're working on 2029 as first teaching. So what does that actually look like for our students? So here I have a table and it shows the years across the top and then down the side, the year groups that the current students are currently in. And so you can see that if you take a year 7 pupil who's in your year 7 now, they're going to next year be in year 8 and so on. And so actually they will experience the legacy Key Stage 3 curriculum and the legacy GCSE curriculum. Interestingly, your current year 6 students who haven't joined you yet, but when they join you next September, assuming you're all secondary rather than all through, they will experience the legacy Key Stage 3, but then they'll become the first cohort to do the reformed GCSEs. So it's really worth understanding that there's what the route of each student is going to be when we're thinking about how we're going to get them to that best place when they start their GCSEs. It's worth noting that this is subject to change if science has moved into that second stage of reform, or obviously if they do the rollout of Key Stage 3 all at once, year by year. The good news is that means we actually have a long time. We can start the work now to move through these changes. What I would say is that while the triple science entitlement will most likely kick in 2028 or even 2029, that doesn't mean we don't need to worry about it until now because the current Ofsted framework is really focused on those equitable outcomes. So it would be important to ensure that you're working on getting an equitable approach for triple science as soon as possible. And that's what the webinar here is designed to help you with. So there are many challenges, and I want to make it really clear that the strategies I'm laying out in this webinar are framed around making success of triple science. And what that means for me is that all students, whether they do double or triple, will be successful in their science education. We can't just make triple great at the expense of double. And I will say that much of the rest of the presentation might feel a little bit uncomfortable for some. It might highlight challenges to how you've been delivering science for maybe a number of years. And it's worth just considering, okay, this is how I do it now, but how can I do it in the future that might be different to how it is now? And that's absolutely fine. So the challenges are equity issues, staffing, timetabling, new curriculum, and training staff, amongst many other things. I thought now might be a nice point for, I know some of you have already added to the chat what you want to get out of this today, but it might be another nice point for everyone to add any other ideas that they want to make sure they get out of the time. And Eva, if you could let me know if there's anything that is worth sharing with the group, would be great. Before I move on through the presentation. Does anyone have anything that they are wondering about, that they're not sure about? Just make sure that's in the chat so I can get it covered up through today's session.
So some of the original things that people were saying was clarification on timetabling, as well as also looking at just other models of delivering triple science and potentially looking to streamline their current model. And then also just looking ahead to the curriculum review to just see what some suggestions might be around the new model.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eva. That's really helpful. And I'm glad to hear that we're kind of covering all those ideas through today's session. So I've based all of this advice on my experience within art schools and previously, but also evidence I've gathered from a number of sources. And I'll include the link to all of these as further reading in my toolkit. But for now, it's really worth understanding that the evidence base on the impact of double and triple is actually a bit shaky, not very comprehensive at all. But through these various reports and other organisations, we've got some good bets that are really worth thinking about when we are considering triple science. So we need to handle triple science really carefully, and it's a real touchstone issue for many science teachers because it adds a lot of complexity to the system. One issue I really want you to take away from this session is that fundamentally it's an equity and inclusion issue. And actually, as it stands across the country, access to triple science is not equitable. So we really need to keep this front of mind when we're making decisions. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a deeper dive into this. Only 13% of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds take triple science, which is a big gap to those not disadvantaged at 28%. There's a big regional disparity. So in the Southeast, we have double the rate of triple science compared to the rest of the country. And this really does impact future options. So Becky Francis herself did a study saying that students are nearly 4 times more likely to study A-level science if they've studied triple science. So we really need to think carefully about how we roll out triple science because we need it to be fair for all students. So schools make decisions about who will study triple science for really good reasons. And there's a model that I traditionally see across many schools. It'd be interesting for you to reflect whether this is very similar for you. So it's that top sets are put onto triple and they do the higher tier. The middle sets are assigned to double. They do the higher tier as well. And then the bottom sets are put onto foundation tier. Often we find that the triple sets get our specialist teachers. They get access to quite a lot of practical work often. However, they are rarely given sufficient curriculum time, so the curriculum is rushed for them. And also, they don't necessarily get the depth of curriculum experience that they might have because we're just rushed through to cover all that extra content that's in triple. Middle sets are assigned to double science, and therefore the students don't see themselves as good enough for triple, and it can cause them to become quite engaged. It'll be interesting to know if this is anyone else's experience, but in my experience, students sort of do worse than they might have done in English and maths, where that structure doesn't exist, because they just feel a bit disenfranchised from science. Finally, students in the bottom set are often placed on foundation tier and given one teacher. And I think that's often a good experience because it means that those deeper relationships are built. However, it does mean that they're less likely to be taught by subject specialists. They do less practical work. And very often, again, there's a pressure from that teacher to cover content. So the lessons don't necessarily build that deep understanding of scientific concepts. So actually, the current offer isn't really great for anyone. And our typical triple science student is going to change. And that's actually a really good thing. So before it was typically, not always, but typically top set. Whereas actually we need to imagine a world where any student in the cohort might choose to do triple science for a variety of reasons. So it might be because they really do well in science, they find it easy and they're achieving in science. It might be that they are a little bit nerdy like me and just want to learn about space or whatever topic that they have a passion for. Maybe it's a career thing. Maybe they want to become a nurse and they know they need science for that. Maybe their parents really see the kudos for studying triple science and their parents are pushing them to do that. It could be something like they just don't like other options and science is the least worst of those options for them. There could be a variety of other reasons that we just don't know about. So we need to prepare for this in order to make triple science a success for all of those who choose it and also those who are not, so that we are bearing in mind that we've got a different profile of student now. And that's a great thing in terms of equity, but it just means we're going to have to be extra careful. One concern that I hear about this, about a wider range of students studying triple science, is that they'll struggle. And teachers say, or parents say, oh, they're going to struggle because of the trickier content. And actually, this is a myth that we really need to debunk. Each GCSE has a spread of challenge so that given sufficient curriculum time, which I'll talk about more later, a student should be able to score just as well on triple science as they would have if they'd have done double in an equivalent amount of time. Because each GCSE has the same spread of difficulty. It's just that triple science is, I've actually done this wrong here. That's the myth is at the top that triple science is harder, not longer, but it's the other way around. Okay, so let's consider how we can meet those challenges. The first issue I want to talk about is curriculum. Often I see science teachers worrying about getting through the content rather than ensuring students have really mastered the knowledge and skills required to be successful. This is true in Key Stage 3, often in Key Stage 4, and sometimes I've even seen it in Key Stage 5. So staff are so worried about having ticked off those lesson titles that they're not always really curious about what students know and can do. So they will move on to electrolysis before students really understand what an ion is. What has this got to do with my triple science webinar? Well, the problem is that students finish Key Stage 3 without those secure foundations that they need to continue at Key Stage 4. And if we do see science as just a set of facts, then it doesn't all hold together. And we often spend a lot of time in Key Stage 4 just repeating that previous content. Let me explain a little bit more detail. So here are some topics which often come up in early Key Stage 3. And I see sometimes that these are taught as discrete topics. And so students don't often make the links between the topics. And students and teachers don't make those explicit to students. So they just see these as a list of separate topics and don't necessarily make the links between them. What teachers sometimes fail to see is that deeper structure of the subject and the disciplinary knowledge that helps students make links between topics and sort of acts as that glue to make the curriculum coherent. And when teachers understand this, this supports students to develop a deeper understanding of the subject. Key Stage 4 is so much smoother when that happens, and it will actually set up all students for Key Stage 4 success, whether they're going to study double or triple science. I thought, although I don't like always referring to Ofsted, this little paragraph from their recent guide is very helpful. It's a quote. This quote is referring to weaker practice that's frequently seen in schools. So I'll give you a moment to read that. So the solution to this issue comes down, as so many things do, to the curriculum. It's really crucial that your curriculum maps out not only the substantive knowledge that students need to know, but also carefully sequences the working scientifically skills so that students develop those over time. And actually, I'd argue that this is most critical at Key Stage 3. I thought we'd do a little experiment here. One idea I hear all the time is that we can't do triple because we just don't have the time. And science teachers feel just so rushed all the time to complete the curriculum. And they just get through content. And I think that there are solutions to this that lie in how we design curriculum. So what I would like you to have a minute or two to think about is I've taken some parts of our national curriculum and put them in the slide here. And there's 4 different chunks. And I want you to have a guess about what year group each of these statements comes from. So feel free to add it to the chat, or if you just want to write it down and think about it yourself. So what I'd like you to do is read through these 4 statements from the national curriculum and see if you can guess in which year they are from. I'll give you a moment to think about that.
We've got 2 guesses suggesting Key Stage 2.
Great. It'd be great if you could even narrow that down and tell me what year group you think that would be. Because in the national curriculum in Key Stage 2, it's broken down by year group.
We've now got quite a few people all suggesting Year 4.
So
with someone saying later in Year 6.
Okay, interesting. So actually these all come from different parts of the national curriculum. So the water cycle one is from Year 6. I think the reason it's from Year 6 is because it's that bit about associating the rate of evaporation with temperature, that cause and effect piece, not just about what evaporation and condensation is. The second one about the circuits, even being able to say whether it will light up, that's from Year 4. The water one is from Year 3. So students in Year 3 should be able to explain that water travels up the plant from the roots through the leaves, through to the leaves. So have an understanding of the first bit of transport in plants. And then, yeah, that magnet one is Year 3. So it's interesting. Loads of people could guess whereabouts these came from, but time and time again in my teaching, I see teachers in Key Stage 3 not building this knowledge into their lessons. They assume that the students have never seen these things before and that they're kind of coming fresh. I've seen lots of teachers teach circuits as if students have never put a circuit together before. Now, absolutely, I know that it's not 100% certain that every student will finish Key Stage 2 with this. I'm aware that many teachers feel that their Year 7s join the school with less science than this. But what we need to do is really carefully assess our students and work out what they can do before making these kinds of decisions. So it's really worth considering that and understanding what they can do so as not to cram even more content into Key Stage 3. So as I've intimated, Key Stage 3 really is the key to getting Key Stage 4 right. And so what I've included in your toolkit is an audit for you to do of your curriculum, thinking carefully about these questions amongst others. So I'd really recommend that you take time, maybe with your leadership team, to consider how your Key Stage 3 can be best practice and meeting the needs of Key Stage 4. Not least because at the moment we don't really know what Key Stage 4 is going to look like, and we expect that there'll be more changes to Key Stage 4 than Key Stage 3. So takeaways from this section, really thinking about progression through Key Stage 3. Do your staff really understand what students should already be able to do, what is new in Key Stage 3 and where it builds in Key Stage 4. Thinking about disciplinary knowledge, do your curriculum documents explicitly map those skills so that you know they're building over time? And also, how are you considering the mastery approach of not skipping through contents, making sure that students are building long-term memory of things and building on that moving forwards? Great. So now we're talking a bit more nitty-gritty when we get into the staffing. So as I'm sure you've read in lots of the commentary about this, the concern is that if we expand triple science without the time and the expertise, we risk having thinner science for everyone, and that would increase inequity. So adding more curriculum hours is just only going to make the issue worse and makes all science weaker. The assumption is that if you put more science teachers on triple, you're actually going to have fewer for double. And considering we expect that still more vulnerable students would be on a double tier, then are they going to actually get an even worse deal? So we need to think really carefully. And luckily we have time to do this, but we need to think really carefully about how we're going to do it. So it starts off with thinking about our staff recruitment and retention. We need to really value our current team. We need to upskill teachers. We need to upskill those who are science teachers and not science teachers. And then we need to recruit and train great people. So you can start planning for this now. When it comes to retention, there are some factors that we know are really important when making sure that teachers stay in the settings we have them in. Sadly, we don't have time today to dive too deep into all of these aspects of retaining your expert teachers, but these are the ones which research tells us are really important. And in the audit section of your tool, or in the staff section of your toolkit, there's an audit where you can consider the risks to retaining your current staff. Essentially, the most important thing is workload. So what are you and your team doing to make the workload manageable for your teachers, whether that's having a resourced curriculum, having a reduced marking expectation when it comes to, say, termly assessments, whether it's about expecting teachers to mark books, all those things. What are you doing about that? Really important is making sure that they feel supported within the team, particularly when it comes to behavior. Behavior is a really big issue for why teachers might leave. Teachers really value their high quality CBD. If they feel like they're being developed, they are so much more likely to stay. And then two aspects which are important, but further down the list than you might expect, are flexible working and pay. So I would suggest that you really take the time in that audit to consider what changes you might need to make sure you hold on to those really expert teachers that you've got in your team. Good bets for upskilling teachers. Actually, hang on, sorry. Yeah. Keeping those teachers isn't enough. with this extra demand, we can't just keep the teachers we've got. We'll also need to upskill them to build in flexibility into the workforce. And this goes both ways. You'll need physicists who have only ever taught maybe top set, maybe A level. They might need to be able to support those low priority attending students who now are in their classes. You might also require some of your teachers to be able to teach triple science content when they've never done so before. Even more concerningly, you might actually find that the extra timetable time means you need teachers from non-science backgrounds to teach outside of specialism. So everyone will need to incorporate the changes from the new program of study and the specification into their knowledge base. But we know that as we don't know exactly what that's going to happen yet, I've given you some good bets to start with. So these bets are, firstly, the Ogden Trust Subject Knowledge for Physics Teaching course is a really helpful way of upskilling your non-physicist to be able to teach physics. Another way is to really invest in subject-specific CPD, always hard to say on a Tuesday afternoon. So that will support teachers needing to upskill that subject knowledge within the discipline. And we'd encourage lots of time doing subject-specific department CPD. In art schools, we call this co-planning, and that's a dedicated time, weekly or fortnightly, to discuss science-specific curriculum and pedagogy. We have it built into our mastery programs as well, which staff found really helpful. Finally, we suggest where you are going to have teachers teaching outside of their subject. So you might have teachers from a completely different subject teaching science. They really benefit from a curriculum program where that subject knowledge is built in so that they can immediately, at the point of delivery, learn the subject knowledge they need in order to successfully teach a lesson. It's really worth thinking carefully about recruitment as well. So one thing to be very mindful when planning your recruitment is whether you're looking for a science teacher or a biology, chemistry, physics teacher. So there's merits to both options. The former, teacher of science, gives you flexibility to timetable that teacher however you see fit. But the latter can also attract teachers who have that specialism that your department might be lacking. Personally, I would say that a brilliant biology specialist with right support and training can deliver excellent physics teaching, but you might have to work really hard to upskill someone who's less experienced and less expert even if they're teaching in their own subject. Luckily, there are a lot of bursaries available for training, and these can be quite substantial in chemistry and physics particularly. So it's worth speaking to your teacher training provider to see what information they have on this. I'm sure they'll have lots to support potential applicants with these bursaries. But I did want to highlight that many of the bursaries have been taken up from overseas candidates, and that's really fantastic in terms of bringing a wide range of experience to the UK education system. Many of these people have masters, they have PhDs, but they will certainly require a different kind of support if they're coming from a different country. So it's worth thinking about how you're going to support these teachers to really make a success of the curriculum with you. So in terms of staffing, the first thing I'd ask you to think about is upskilling your teachers. I also want you to think about how you can recruit really carefully, thinking about what your needs are and making sure you meet them. And then how are you going to retain those great teachers? And as I said, that toolkit will really support you with that. Okay, timetabling. I've put this quote here because I think it really applies to timetabling. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Timetabling is a complete dark art. So we really need to understand that it's trade-offs that we're thinking about. Every decision we make is not a best option, it's about what is right for us. And it's going to be different for everyone's context, but I'm going to give you some things to think about. So the status quo has been that top set, it does triple and they're given the subject expert. So that's a very common way that the timetable is created. But now that you might have a different profile of student taking triple, this actually added a layer of complexity. So you might actually have two sets, maybe one for higher tier and one for foundation tier triple. You might wish to retain having 3 subject specialists for the higher tier group, but maybe one for the foundation tier who can really get to know them, keep a close track of those disciplinary skills and their motivation. So my point here is that you'll need to have a clear plan when you're timetabling science and have a real bird's eye view of the trade-offs you're making, and that it might need to be a little bit more nuanced and subtle than it has been previously. There have been a large number of calls for guided learning hours to be part of an Ofsted inspection. As many leaders will hear, content is being reduced in science, as a reason to cut down the number of curriculum hours given to science. It's a big concern I hear in the science community. As you can see, this is the information from the current GCSE, but we don't really expect Ofqual to change this. So triple science is designed to take 50% more curriculum time than double science. So on average, we would expect 4 hours a week for double science and 6 hours a week for triple science. So if you are going to give each student doing triple science the correct number of hours per week, they will need more teaching. Practically, this necessitates putting triple science into an option block, which obviously removes an option for those students. However, if you don't do this, your options are not great, in my opinion. Either you'll have to do triple in an after school time, or you'll have to squeeze triple into the same time as double science. Both of these have serious consequences for equity. Students who have care responsibilities, for example, would be excluded from doing triple after school. Students with SEND would be disadvantaged if you cram the content into reduced time, as they will be less likely to process and retain that information. One benefit of having triple science as an option is that it ensures that students who take it are those who actually want to do it. I've seen triple science students who don't really actually have a passion for science, and the rush to complete it in that reduced curriculum time means they don't really gain a deep appreciation for the subject during the course, and as a result, they don't choose it after GCSEs. So I think it's really worth considering having triple science as an option in an option block for your students. If you squeeze triple into less than 1.5 times of double, you'll be creating barriers for anyone with SEND, anyone with disadvantage, and students with EAL. The toolkit fleshes out these trade-offs even further, so have a look at it and you'll be able to make those informed decisions. Okay, so you might be aware of a piece of work from a few years ago. It was commissioned by the Learning Society, like the Royal Society of Biology, Chemistry, Institute of Physics, and they were looking at the many models for provision of GCSE science. It's worth taking a little minute to review this section from the report. I know it's very small, but it basically shows the different options for lesson allocation and teacher allocation. And what was wild is that they realized there were over 60 different permutations in action across different schools in the country. So in some schools, they might have had combined like a proportion of time being adequately split. In other times, it was not. Sometimes teachers were teaching in specialisms, sometimes not. Sometimes they're teaching out. There are just so many different combinations. So here is the breakdown of the most common approaches that were found in this report. So I'm just going to give you a moment to read all these and decide which approach your department is using. So the first one is where triple gets half the time again compared to combined, and that those were equitable with the option subjects. The second one is where science, both double and triple, got less time than an option subject, proportion to the number of GCSEs. The third one is where the triple science was squeezed into double science into the same time as double science. The fourth one, the combined, was also squeezed, so it was less than the option subjects. The fifth one was where only triple science was offered, and the sixth one is where only combined science is offered. Okay, so now you know which one you fall in. You might be interested in which was the most common. So here are the percentages from each approach. And what is interesting is the first one is the one that the report was hoping would be the most common, where resources are shared equally. And actually, out of the over 500 schools that were surveyed, not one met that criteria. So it's really, really uncommon, unfortunately, that double and triple science offered the same amount of teaching time as the option subjects, and that both double and triple are given equitable time compared to the curriculum content that you need to cover. Quite surprising. So it's interesting when you hear the discussions all around subject specialist. It's worth saying that the learner societies always advocate for subject specialist teaching because they see their subjects being really distinct and unique. But practically, there is more that unites scientific thinking than divides it. And also, teaching 3 subjects in 4 lessons per week is really, really tricky. So I would suggest it really comes down to your individual school and circumstance. And I'm going to help you think about that a little bit more. So Ofsted have suggested that actually in departments where there's lots of outside of specialism teaching, the curriculum coverage tends to be more superficial, particularly in physics. Practical work is reduced or less ambitious. And as we've mentioned before, teachers really focus on just getting through the content. So that would seem to be an argument for having subject specialist teaching. However, I would like you to imagine a school with these conditions. So they've got 4 lessons for double, 6 for triple, set 2 students who have chosen not to study triple science, so they're doing double. They've got targets from 6 to 9. And then you've got set 5 students who have lots of gaps in their knowledge, and maybe lots of them have SEND. If you just went the double science gets 3 specialist teachers approach, then that actually might not work for some of those students, particularly if they've got 4 lessons a week. The timetabling constraint is massive here. So maybe the bottom group would be better off with 1 teacher who knew them really, really well, could work carefully to build their disciplinary knowledge, whilst that second set might benefit from the subject specialist teaching. So this is what I mean by the nuance we need to consider. One great solution here, speaking as someone who with a love of science, is to get 6 periods per week to double science. And that would bring it in line with, say, geography and history that tend to get 3 hours per week for 1 GCSE. Double science is 2 GCSEs. So having taught in a school where this was the case, the impact on outcome was brilliant. And particularly when it came to our uptake at A-level, students who studied double science were still able to do A-level really confidently. And that was particularly true given the quite disadvantaged profile of that cohort generally. As I mentioned, though, many organisations prefer to have their teachers within specialism because that allows them to teach the same content multiple times over the week to different groups. So maybe they teach biology to year 2, set 2, set 3, and set 4. I wonder whether that would prevent teachers from really getting to know their group very well. And I think that's particularly going to be an issue where students are more vulnerable to educational disadvantage. I have always taught in schools in very challenging contexts. So for me, having double science groups benefit from consistency of expectation. Having the same teacher really benefited them, but it's going to be different for everyone here. The further complication of having 3 teachers is just how to timetable it. If it's not divisible by 3, how are you going to do it? One way is just to have more lessons for one discipline, like maybe biology has 2 lessons a week and chemistry and physics have 1, or you could have a carousel system. But for me, both of these options are reasons to just go for 1 teacher for double students. But you'll have a sense of what's manageable for your team, and my toolkit will really help you to have those discussions in your school and make sure that you're making informed trade-offs. So when it comes to timetable, here's what I think you should take away. So the first one is just to be aware of what model you're using. Make sure that everyone understands what the model is and what the trade-offs are. And then when you're aware of those trade-offs, you'll be able to mitigate those with other decisions. And the final thing I'd say is just about being responsive. So be nuanced with your thoughts. It might be that different groups need different things. It might be that your year 10s need one thing and your year 11s need another. It's not going to be as simple as it might have been. The last thing I'd like to talk to today is about prestige and the allocation of students to double or triple science. So we know that double science is still a really gold standard qualification. It's a fantastic GCSE and it's not easy by any means, but there are some implicit messages that we give students in the way that we allocate them to double or triple science. So the traditional way has often made it clear to students really that triple is more prestigious. We put our most expert teachers on triple. The top set get put on triple. Only triple scientists can study A-level. We talk about dropping students to double. So by having this PR issue for double science, we don't always support students to make great decisions. Those who don't enjoy science maybe do triple science because excuse me, that's what they feel they have to do as top set students. Those who could actually do really well and benefit from triple science are avoiding it because they are just not top set students, so they don't feel able to. So I thought about some ways in which schools I know have allocated science students to triple science. So it might be that it's an option block and it was totally a free choice whether they chose to do double or triple science. As we've seen, though, that's very, very vanishingly rare. It might be that students have to request to be in a triple class. It might be that students are allocated by their current grades or their target grades. It might be that teachers make individual decisions. Maybe teachers make recommendations to the students and they make decisions. Maybe just a whole class is allocated as triple. Unfortunately, the current information from the DfE is quite unclear about how schools should allocate students under these new changes. So when it becomes a statutory requirement, will students have a totally free choice or can they be encouraged into certain pathways? I expect that a student predicted to say get a 4-3 in science might be allowed to do triple science in some schools, but not others. And we need to be really careful about how we message this to make sure that equity does not become a concern. So messaging is going to be really key here. When it comes to choices, there are three influences on students' choices. So firstly, is their own ideas of what the prestige of double and triple science is. We know that their parents and carers are going to play a really important role, but also the teachers. So when I think about this issue, I always remember a group I inherited in year 11. They were a second set, and so they were allocated to double science, and they were so hard to motivate in my lessons. They did the real bare minimum of homework and they never really cared. But I noticed that when I saw them in other subjects, it wasn't the case. And after I got to know them a little bit better, I realized that it was just that they thought they were bad at science because they'd been put on double science. They weren't allowed to study triple science. So hopefully the reform makes it clear that this isn't the case. And I do worry that all the conversation about triple science will make it seem even more prestigious. But what I hope to see is that schools, but also the education sector more widely, makes it really, really clear that triple science is more content, not harder content. And it'll be interesting to see whether this has an effect of widening the access to triple science. Really key that through our messaging, we manage these misconceptions. So we need to make sure that students know triple science is not harder than double science. Triple science is not necessary to study A-level science unless some sixth forms insist on it. So the risk of having these misconceptions is twofold. Students who do double because they think, the students who do double just think it's the lower quality option and they feel discouraged for that, but also that they are discouraged from doing triple science because they think it's too hard for them. It's really important that we get this right and address this issue. Also, representation is really important. Students need to understand that people like them can study triple science. People like them go on to do double science and do really well because you can't be what you can't see. So one of my uh, parts of my toolkit that I'm sending out is looking at how are you making sure that you message representation that everyone can be a great scientist. We also need to be really careful to avoid gatekeeping. So that what I mean by that are approaches that we take that by proxy or by the way they're set up, sort of structurally keep these inequalities going that mean that students do not have a really free choice when it comes to these options. So it could be that you have proxy criteria issues, for example, prior attainment or target grades. Maybe you stream students in a way that means that it's unlikely for students who start with from a low base point will be able, even if they are late developers, to get onto a triple science pathway. It might be that your curriculum offer constrains their options. If you structure your curriculum in a way that means that some students will never be able to get onto the triple pathway. And as I mentioned already, the early lock into pathways is really, we need to be careful about that. We know that, for example, students might join in year 7 or 8 with English as an additional language, really holding them back at that moment. But once they have a higher level of English, it might be that they're able to access the curriculum in a way that they haven't before. So we must make sure that we don't shut those options down for them. It's really worth saying that you might get some pushback on that because it's not how we do it. It's not how it's been done for a really long time. People are really concerned. The things I hear are, we won't be able to staff this. Our timetable is set. This is going to damage double science, I think is a really valid concern. Worry about parents and what they're going to say. So it's really worth planning for that pushback and considering how you can manage it in order to support your students. So the takeaways for this messaging is making sure that everyone's on message, a teacher's giving out that right information, do parents and students know what they are doing. I think it's really important to over communicate that double is the gold standard, triple is longer, not harder. And finally, having that framework for decision making that means you're not making decisions by stealth or proxy, that push students into pathways that they might not have otherwise got into. So, as I said, I am going to be sending you this toolkit with an action plan. So you'll have a timeline for decision making that will really make sure you're set up for success. I've got some examples of like model timetables in there that you can use, and also some information about how you might message this to your students, your parents, teachers, to make sure that you can move forward in a way you feel really confident in. So as I said at the beginning, Eva will be sending this out to everyone at the end of the webinar. So I really hope you find it useful. So now we're finished. I wondered if there's any questions in the chat that I can address.
We did have one come up earlier when you were showing the slide that had the different year groups with the rollout of the new Key Stage 3 as well as the new GCSE curriculum.
Yeah.
Someone has said that at the recent Sparks conference, there was a discussion around the full 7 to 9 implementation in 28-29. So just getting clarification as to whether it's a full rollout of Key
We
Stage
actually
3.
don't know at the moment.
Okay.
There's no guidance on that. So it's a really great question. It's something every time I look at that diagram, I'm like, oh gosh, it really matters whether it's done as we'd call it a flooding model, where 7, 8, and 9 just start on the new curriculum. So the last time a big curriculum change like this happened, which was quite a while ago now, they did 7 and then 8 and then 9. So pupils who like followed a coherent curriculum all the way. What the concern would be if we just started a new program of study, then the students in year 9 wouldn't have studied what they should have done in year 7. So that's why we're working on that assumption. But it is really worth keeping an eye out for that. And that's something we are absolutely thinking about all the time, and building into our planning for this is which way it's going to go. So my assumption, I would imagine, and I think the sensible way is to do it year by year by year, but we aren't 100% clear on that. No one has communicated either way. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, that makes sense also as to why someone's looking at the alternative approach, because it could be either, but like you say,
It
making
definitely
educated
could be.
guess.
And it will be really interesting because that means you would have to have a slightly changed curriculum for every year group coming through, because everyone's going to have had a different offer. So that adds an awful lot of extra complications. So that's why we're assuming that's not what's going to happen. But yeah, I think watch this space, and we'll keep an eye out on all of the AC Plus communications, because we'll make that really clear. So if you're signed up for our newsletter, or if you follow us on LinkedIn, we've been thinking about this a lot. So we'll make sure to signpost that for you.
Great,
Are there any
thank
other
you.
questions?
Not got any others in the chat just now. Oh, one's just come in. Oh no, it's just a thank you and saying yes. So the PowerPoint I will also send out tomorrow. So tomorrow, I'll email kind of all attendees with the recording of the webinar, so you can look through Jess's slides and also her exposition over the top, as well as also the toolkit that she mentioned.
Great. Well, on that, I'll just leave Eva with this slide.
Yeah. So if anyone does want to kind of talk about Art Curriculum Plus as a specific science mastery program, you can also get in touch for this via the partnerships email or booking directly during this link. But as I say, from the content from today's webinar, I'll be sending that out tomorrow, regardless. And then one last question, Jess. There was someone asking what would be some guidance on when is best to start GCSE in year 9?
Oh, as in whether you have a 2-year Key Stage 3 or a 3-year Key Stage 3. Well, I think that for me, if you have really built your foundations well in Key Stage 3, you can do that in year 7, 8, and 9. And then in year 10, you can start that GCSE work, but you don't need to cover all of the cells again, because you already taught that really well in Key Stage 3. So I think it's great to start in Key Stage 4. It keeps everyone's options open a bit longer. it means things are a bit more flexible. It means you don't have that sort of dropping down from triple to double that I talked about, that I think is problematic. And I think it really gives students the chance to build those like foundational disciplinary skills and knowledge, and then move on to Key Stage 4. So my personal opinion on that is to, yeah, 3-year Key Stage 3 and then 2-year Key Stage 4. Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It was lovely to speak to you all, and thank you for all your participation in the chat. Looking forward to seeing you at another webinar soon.
Thank you so much for hosting as well, Jess.
Thanks, Eva. Bye.
Thank you. Bye all.